Soul Split. Hearing this name will either invigorate a nostalgic happiness deep inside of you, or deeply rooted hatred. Nothing in between. But with the new prayer book coming with the release of Desert Treasure 2, this is a name that needs to be discussed. For those unaware, a reward for completing the upcoming quest Desert Treasure 2 is a new prayer book called the Ruinous Powers. In this video we'll be talking about the current state of prayer in the game, curses, which you all know well, and these new Ruinous Powers, as well as how they all tie together. Let's get started. Prayer is something that never really had an update outside of new training methods such as the Will the Altar. In fact, since the release of Old School RuneScape, only 3 new prayers have been added since it released: Preserve, Rigor, and Augury. So when we're considering an entire new prayer book, this will be the biggest update to prayer we've seen to date. The original prayer book, which we all know and love, is heavily combat focused. In fact, every single prayer except 4 are only combat focused. The outliers are Rapid Restore, Rapid Heal, Redemption, and Preserve. And even these 4 are mostly used for combat, bar a few niche uses. Whether this is protection from attack styles, buffs to attack styles, or additional effects that help combat such as Smite, they have little to no application outside of combat. And that's what we've always been happy with. However, what if I said that was to change? But before we get into how this can possibly change, we have to talk about the Ruinous Powers sister spellbook, Ancient Curses. Curses were a new prayer book released in December of 2009 that came out with the release of the Temple at Sentiston quest, a quest in the Margaret storyline similarly to Desert Treasure 2. So it's perceived that we could be seeing a lot of similarities, and this can be a scary prospect for some people. When Curses were released, they became the go-to prayer book. There was very little reason to go back to the original prayer book when Curses were unlocked, if any at all. Ancient Curses came with many interesting and unique prayers. They had prayers that sap the opponent's stats to increase your own, prayers that protect and deflect against specific combat styles, and of course the 2 big ones on release, Soul Split and Turmoil. Now, Turmoil was just a straight up buff to piety, the deflect prayers were a direct buff to protection prayers, and Soul Split was, well, Soul Split. Having enhanced prayers that mimic and enhance the capabilities of the original prayer book caused the original prayer book to become obsolete, as there was not really a reason to be on the original prayer book anymore no matter the activity, assuming that you had all the prayers unlocked. This, of course, is generally a bad design decision, and what we refer to as power creep. However, just those in themselves were not the cause of the problems with the Ancient Curses. The problem lied primarily with Soul Split. Now, on release, Soul Split was a prayer that when active would heal your character for 20% of the damage done. This was that strong that when paired with Turmoil made protection prayers almost obsolete at most bosses, as the additional damage from Turmoil and the sustain from Soul Split was far superior to protection prayers and food. This caused the game to generally become easier, and this is one of the main reasons that a lot of people are against having Curses, or Soul Split specifically, back into the game. In the current state of Old School RuneScape, to camp bandos as an example efficiently, you either need to do a very specific kiting method that if you mess up just 1 tick you'll take damage, or you need to off-tick minions and perfectly flick, both of which are very hard tasks to accomplish. And only the top PVMers are able to do so. But imagine if we had a prayer that could cause almost anybody to inflate the number of bosses they can kill per trip. It'd cause a hit to the economy and lessen the gap between skilled players. In fact, to really get across how crazy Soul Split was, let's take a look at this clip from none other than Wooks. If I said to you that you could solo the Corporal Beast with no food at all using only prayers, would you think that's crazy? Of course you would. If this was possible, would you say it was overpowered? More than likely. In this clip, Wooks solos the Corporal Beast with no food at all, using only prayers with a gear setup that's basically used in Old School RuneScape. In fact, his setup is worse than the gear that we've got today. He flicks Soul Split when attacking, and flicks the deflection prayers when being hit, repeating this cycle until Corp is defeated. I'm sure the clip speaks for itself, but this is exactly why people are scared of the new prayers, and for good reason. But I have some good news. Don't be. Listen to this clip from the recent Winter Summit livestream where the new prayers are being discussed.
We are, very strong commitment here, we have no interest in bringing Curses to Old School now or ever. This is going to be something new. It's more like the spellbooks where, like, you know, sometimes use the ancient spellbook, really good in some places, but you would never use it in others. And likewise, you know, Lunar spellbook, like, there's utility to all of them. You're going to be swapping between them.
It's not just going to be combat either, right? We can go pretty wide with this. We can affect skilling. We can affect, obviously, a lot of PvP interactions. Like, hopefully this new prayer book has something for everyone.
So, from this clip, we'll learn that Jagex have no interest in bringing Curses directly to Old School, or to replicate Curses. They want to add not only combat, but utility spells too, and they want it to be like a spellbook where there are benefits to each. We can assume quite a lot from this. So let's get into what I personally expect from the prayer book from the perspective of a game developer. When looking at potential new prayers here, we have to be very careful about the current limitations and problems with the prayer system, namely prayer flicking, and how overpowered having a prayer on every tick for no cost could be. Honestly, having prayer flicking in the game limits design choice, and if it's not changed, Jagex will be faced with the same problems. It'll be quite hard designing the new prayers. So, hopefully they're not scared to add countermeasures to some of the prayers at least. A couple of quick ideas for counterbalance of prayers could be the thrall method, where when the prayer is used, prayer points are removed from the player and the player is given a buff, or having a base cost as well as the current drain rate on the prayers. So if you were flicking and there was a base cost on it of, say, 1, every time you flicked, your prayer would go down by 1. For the first example, you could use a prayer once and it could go on cooldown, but you achieve some form of buff for, say, 60 seconds. This would require a rewrite to existing functionality of prayers, so might not be the best option. For the second example though, this could be done within the limitations of the current system, and it's a really simple method of preventing prayer flicking whilst also being more unique with prayer designs and opening up more opportunities. Whether they use one of these methods or a third unthought of one, this prayer book definitely shouldn't only be limited to drain rate design and cater to flicking, or you might miss out on a whole bunch of cool designs. Now let's get into what I expect, or we can as a community potentially expect, from the new prayer book. Now all of these are my personal opinions, feel free to give your feedback, disagree with me, anything of the sort. I'm just trying to open a discussion of some interesting ideas, as well as some interesting methods of actually using prayers and the prayer system in general. Firstly, any curses are almost all off the cards. Upgraded Piety, Rigor, Augury will probably not exist on this spellbook because they want you to have a choice between both prayer books, so there shouldn't be any upgrades on this one to existing prayers. This also means you'll more than likely not be getting deflection prayers, as back in the day, they were used mostly as an upgrade to the originals. Similarly, Berserker, an ancient curse that extends combat stat boosts by 15%, is already outclassed by our very own Preserve, so we know that won't be returning. Jagex's design philosophies for this they spoke about seem to back up the claim of curses not returning. Great, so what will we be getting? First of all, let's talk about some potential combat prayers. They mentioned we'll be getting some combat prayers and even some to help with PvP, but they'll be very different to what we have today. To figure out what prayers fill these gaps, we need to think in reverse a little bit. What doesn't yet exist on the standard prayer book? And the first answer is a magic damage prayer. The current prayers in the game only affect magic accuracy and magic defense. They don't touch magic damage. Having all three together would be overpowered. However, if the accuracy is not needed, swapping over to a prayer book with a prayer that only affects magic damage could be really interesting, and have a very clear use case for both the original Augury and the new magic damage prayer. Now, while there's also room for a melee and a range prayer specifically, let's talk about some prayers that might fit all three combat styles. First, multi-hit. Multi-hit, much like the name suggests, could be a prayer that allows all single hit damage to splash to targets. This would not work with attacks that already damage multiple targets such as King Chompers or Ice Barrage, and it'd splash only 20 to 25% of the damage dealt. There'd be a drain rate on this prayer, as we're losing Piety, Rigor and Augury, so we'd only be able to pair it with other combat prayers on this book. However, if we used a Trident and paired this with the magic damage prayer, it could be a very interesting combination that shouldn't be too overpowered. Next up, let's think outside the box a little bit from now on. Recharger. So Recharge would be a prayer that has a 25% chance to save charges on any chargeable item at the cost of prayer points. Now this is obviously very strong if prayer flicking can potentially save a lot of charges, saving a lot of money on these items. To counteract flicking in this scenario, this spell could be similar to a Thrall. Now the prayer could cost 15% of your prayer level to use rounded up, and it could last for 3 minutes. But for every charge that you save, one additional prayer point will be deducted. This design would be treated like a spell, however it's heavily tied to prayer points, making it a perfect fit in my opinion, and something outside of the norm of prayer. I think while this wouldn't be used in many places, there is a use case for it, but this one's more to showcase how we could enhance the prayer system and we don't have to be locked to an activate prayer and then prayer drain style of game design. Imagine if you're using a Trident, some Barrows pieces, Amulet of Blood Fury, even though that makes no sense. You could be even using 5-6 prayer points per attack if it procs all at the same time. So it would be fairly balanced in my opinion. We could also do a similar thing for special attack, but this one could be pretty interesting. If we had a prayer that reduced all special attacks by 30%, would that be overpowered? Yeah, definitely. It'd have use in bossing, as well as in PvP situations. But what if we had a large drawback? What if we had a prayer that can be activated with 0 prayer drain? You could just keep it up and it'd be there active in the spellbook at no cost. However, when you use a special attack, your prayer drains 100% of the special attack energy used. Now this might sound a little confusing, so let's make an example. If you have this prayer active and use a 50% special attack, such as a Bando's Godsword, it'd instead only use 35% of your special attack energy. But it would also drain 35 prayer points. If you spec twice with the BGS, this would drain 70 prayer points in total. This has clear drawbacks in both bossing and PvP, whilst also having clear use cases. If used on a God Wars dungeon trip, this would short your trip due to the amount of supplies needed to restore the prayer, meaning it'd only really be used when required or in niche situations. It would, however, be really good at teleport and spec methods such as the Corporal Beast. In PvP, however, the clear downsides are that you'll run out of prayer points if you're not careful, whilst it also creates some interesting attack combinations using the lowered special amounts. This would probably get voted no on due to its potential in PvP, with the drawbacks of anti-PKers getting a PKers +1 due to a screw up on their end could create an interesting dynamic. If a PKer accidentally uses too much spec and has the prayer drain to 0, the protection prayers go off and the +1 goes off, so if an anti-PKer gets them, then they're screwed. Once again, this is to showcase that prayers can be designed that have no instant prayer cost, but later on cost prayer once the criteria has been met. A special attack prayer could also go the other way, where you can drain your opponent's special attack in PvP. However, this is honestly bad design in my opinion, as taking power away from another player would make both players in a PvP scenario unhappy in the long run. And finally, a nice and simple combat prayer to end on, Recoil. Whilst deflection prayers probably won't exist as a buffed version of the original protection prayers, a recoil effect could be nice. While this prayer is active, a ring of recoil effect will activate on the player. There's potential to allow this to stack with the current ring of recoil or suffering as well, which could be busted, I don't know. But either way, this has a clear application to PvM, allowing the ability to kill Zulrah snakelings without wearing a recoil ring, for example, whilst also having a solid place in PvP without being too overpowered. Now that we've talked about a few ideas for combat and PvP, let's go into the part that I'm most looking forward to on the new prayer book. Utility spells. Let's start off with some really simple additions that shouldn't be all that controversial. First, Energetic. Energetic's a prayer that simply doubles the restore rate of your run energy. Very versatile, very unique, very good. The method and the amount of restoration here could easily be changed, such as scaling based on prayer level or prayer bonus, but regardless, run energy restoration through prayer definitely has a place on this book. We've also got skill buffs. Now, these are simple buffs to skills. The number can be fine-tuned. Most skilling actions already deny prayer flicking, so a drain rate should be fine here, but there's always the option of charging 1 prayer point to activate it or draining prayer when activating it as a buff. But I believe a standard prayer drain is fine for these. First, we've got the Hunter's Soul, a new prayer which increases the success rate of all hunter traps by 10%. Next, we've got Gatherer's Essence, a new prayer which increases the success of all gathering skills by 10%. And we've got Agile Energy, where agility obstacle fail rates reduced by 10%. And these are just a few examples, but what if we were to look into some more unique utility or skilling prayers? What would they look like? Well, these may not be perfect, but I think they fit the bill pretty well to get the point across. Now, first, imagine a prayer that while active, woodcutting, fishing and mining grant double the resources for no additional experience. Skilling's needed a buff to resources gathered for a long time, and it's slowly been coming into the game, but without a risk of inflating experience rates. I imagine this would be pretty well received. This could stack with other forms of additional gathering supplies, such as using spirit flakes when fishing. In this case, the wording could be changed to gain 1 additional resource rather than double, so fishing with spirit flakes in the prayer would grant 3 fish. Now, production skills could also use a buff in some way, but these are incredibly hard to balance due to some banks being really close to altars, namely the Kuren Castle. However, if gains were minimal and it was a fast activity that caused praying to hinder the amount per hour that you could make, it could work. Let's look at Herbal for this one. Imagine a prayer that when active would not drain prayer, however would clean a full inventory of herbs in 1 click. But every herb cleaned this way drained 1 prayer point, forcing you to either use prayer potions in between inventories or go out of your way to an altar slowing it down. This could devalue some existing things in the game like the Desert Diary for herbs, but it would be slower and still cost a little bit with prayer potions, making it balanced around it. If production prayers were added like this one, I think that could work, but even ones that are a little stronger could work too, such as something like Producer's Pride. production skills have a 5% chance of making 2 items at once. Now, this would be strong, but not super strong. You'd get like maybe an extra inventory or 2 every hour, but if it requires a high prayer level, even with no downside, speeding up production by 5% wouldn't be such a bad thing. And then finally, we could have some more obscure utility spells. Now, again, imagine a prayer that when active, with no prayer drain, or very little prayer drain, heals 5 hit points for every monster kill, but reduces your prayer by 5 points. You're essentially trading 5 prayer points for 5 hit points on monster kill, so it wouldn't help with bosses that much. This could open up some interesting use cases if there's no form of protection prayers in this book, without being too strong and with a big enough drawback. And then finally, I've got a suggestion that's really out there, but I really like it. Divine Protection. Now, while this prayer is active, this counts as an item that provides immunity to a monster. For example, while this prayer is active, Cave Horrors will not require a Witchwood icon, Aberrant Spectres will not require a nose peg, and it'd also count as one form of Dragonfire protection. Now, bear in mind, all of those are just quick suggestions that came to my head on short notice. They're not really balanced, and some might not be the right thing for the game. However, I do like the idea of Ruinous Powers being quite harsh and having big prayer drains for big effects, like the special attack prayer I suggested. Now, regardless, this video is intended to get your minds ready to think outside the box when it comes to prayers, and open up your mind to ideas such as these if they do get pulled. Having prayers that don't just drain prayer is not a bad thing, and in my opinion could be very healthy for the game if done correctly and open up some more design opportunities. We're not getting curses, we're definitely not getting soul split, but we are ready as a community to get some really incredible prayers. If you disagree with any of these points, please comment. I'd love to see other people's opinions. If you want to discuss this further, please join my Discord channel in the description. Thanks for watching. Love you and leave you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!